Hey everyone, it's Katie from Moonflower Moments. So, especially as Thanksgiving rolls around, I do try to spend a lot of my time in gratitude. And so, as I sat down today, I considered the decks that I'm most grateful for this year. I did have to really condense this list down. I think I got it to 15 decks, so this is probably going to be a longer winded video. But I think it just kind of goes to show you the extent to which I really value my collection, but more importantly, how much I value tarot and the role it fills in my life. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to try to keep it organized by throughout the year. So I do keep a planner, and at the end of each month, I record down my best used decks that month. And so I have a pretty good idea of when I was using these decks and really just kind of getting a lot from them. So I'm going to try to recap essentially, I guess, how I've used these decks over the year, but you're probably going to see some threads of how my tarot practice kind of evolved through the year too. So I'll start with the beginning of the year, and this one is more of a general gratitude than anything specific to what was happening in my life when I purchased this deck and when I was using this deck. But this is the Fifth Spirit Tarot. So I really am incredibly grateful for this deck. I believe that I bought it in probably around February, March, April. It was definitely in the early spring. And I bought this deck after conducting my first client reading and realizing that I really wish that I had something that was a little bit more modern to make the tarot imagery a little bit more approachable towards clients. And so I had seen this deck on, I believe it was Tarot Magpie's channel, because they're always raving about it. And I thought to myself, we have pretty similar taste and decks. I'm just going to go ahead and get it, and I'm so thankful that I did. So I am going to make another video at the end of the year where I talk about my best deck purchases of 2024, and I guarantee you that this is going to be in there, and it's probably going to be pretty high up because this is a deck that I just used and used and used and I couldn't get enough of. I have recently relocated it back to my reading table, so it's starting to get a lot more use now. There was a little time during the summer where I felt like the parchmenty colored papers and kind of the pared back imagery just wasn't matching what was going on outside around me, but it is starting to come back now that the months have died off. And I think just in general, this is a deck that you can reach for at any point in time. I just prefer my practice to be tuned into kind of the cyclical cycles around me. Cyclical cycles, I guess that's redundant. But since purchasing it, I have done a lot of client readings in person, and I'm always so thankful when I have someone that's 15 or 16 walk up, and I know that I think this kind of youthful energy of the Fifth Spirit would really work well with them. So I have used it quite a bit in those settings, and I think that my clients have enjoyed seeing some of this imagery. I am a pips deck person too, so I like that I have another kind of early spring kind of wintry deck that I can kind of put in my back pocket, so that when I'm trying to crave something that's a little bit more pared back to allow my intuition to set in, I have this deck, and I can kind of get lost in my intuition instead of just focusing on the faces and the deep detailed illustrations of the deck itself. So this was Fifth Spirit. This is the first deck that I'm thankful for. I pulled this card the other day when I was planning out what tattoo I'm going to get next, and it just reminded me, because I want to get an egret, which is essentially a bird. It kind of looks like this ibis up here, but it's a little bit different. But it reminded me that I needed to have cypress trees in my tattoo, so this sat on my altar for a little while, helping me plan my tattoos. So that was Fifth Spirit. All right, now we're still, I think, around the same time when I was using these decks. It was probably around March. I went to a birthday dinner with a friend of mine who is a therapist, and she and I were talking about some of the cycles that I had seen play out in my life in regards to just the roles that I fill in my relationships. And she pointed out that there might be a significant power imbalance with some of the people that I'm most closest to. And so I knew that when she pointed that out to me, I was able to sit back and do a lot of like reflective work and try to consider how to break out of the cycles. And I turned to the Zombie Tarot. Sorry, I haven't said the name of the deck yet. I turned to the Zombie Tarot to help me through that. And so I did a series of probably about, I would say 5 to 8 readings over the course of a month using the Zombie Tarot, and it was uncannily accurate. So, and a lot of the themes repeated, which is just another thing that makes you believe in tarot, right? When you're pulling from the same deck, but it's different instances, and you keep seeing the same cards pop up or even the same themes pop up, you know that there's truth and validity to that. And I think the way that the zombies and the humans are depicted, it just gives this, this is like the perfect deck if you really are trying to heal some very deep codependency. At least that's how I found myself using it. And I really am just so grateful for this deck. I bring this deck every single time I go to a event where I'm going to be reading for clients, because I know if I have someone come up to me with like a deeply interpersonal issue and they need help sorting through the threads of how people in their life are interacting with each other and the social dynamics of a situation, I know that this is the correct deck to go to. I mean, this is the Two of Pentacles, and of course it looks like this. So I think that like it's just made for that kind of healing work. And it can be a little bit triggering at times, right? Because in my experience, this deck is like so upfront. But I am so incredibly, endlessly grateful, thankful, just appreciative of having a deck like this in my collection. And if something were to happen to this deck, I would absolutely go back and repurchase it. If I had to limit myself to about 10 decks only, like 10 working decks, this one would easily slot in on that list without any question. So I'm grateful to this deck for pointing out patterns in my life and just helping me along my healing journey of that. So this was the Zombie Tarot. So after having that discussion with my friend and doing that deep work with the Zombie Tarot, I decided that it was time for me to put my own voice and my own wants front and center. And so I created this YouTube channel at the end of March. And when I first got started with my YouTube channel, I was using William Blake almost every single day, actually, to help me plan content and to help me kind of rein in my creative vision. When I had first started, I had really sat on what I wanted this channel to be for a really long time. And I had an endless array of ideas. Like I had a notebook filled with like 100 ideas that I wanted to share with everyone. And I still consult that notebook all the time. And William Blake really helped me refine that vision to make sure that the content that I was putting out was really unique to my own experiences, and that I was creating a space that was really authentic to me. So this guidebook is called the William Blake Tarot of the Creative Imagination. And the reason being is because in the guidebook, for every single card, the deck gives you like a write-up on how like this card in particular could relate to the creative process. And so when I was stuck or trying to figure out like which video to film first, or I wasn't sure how to go about doing something, this deck really gave me a lot of like tangible guidance and tangible advice. And so for that reason, it is one of my #1 creative decks, which is something that I turn to tarot quite a bit for. I don't know why these are upside down. Let me go fix that. So weird. It was just one of those little sections. But anyway, I use my decks for my creative process quite a bit. I'll leave a link in the description box below to some of the other decks that I use to help me. But I will say this is another one that I was just intensely grateful for because it is such an accurate and useful tool. Like this deck has an incredibly defined role in my collection, which is of course why in my top 10 decks of the year, I think I put this as like number 3. But if I could go back and re-rank that deck video, the deck list of my top 10 favorite tarot decks, I think I would put this at number 2. So needless to say, it is very firmly placed in my collection. I like that this is a deck that allows me to really kind of sink into the artwork. I'm a very like word-driven person. I'm not a visual person at all. I have a very difficult time picturing images in my head. Like if you tell me to like picture an apple, like I can barely get like an outline of it in my head. So the fact that this has like verses paired with it on a lot of the minors really makes it an incredibly useful deck for me, because I'm going through, I do read the verses and I find myself using those oftentimes more than the imagery itself. But even if I want to tap into the imagery, there's kind of there's an intensity and a power to it that is just very compelling and makes me want to dig deeper into what the cards have to say. So I'm going to show you the whole deck if I'm not careful. This is, oh look, I almost did show you the whole deck. William Blake, Tarot of the Creative Imagination. So part of my YouTube channel's identity is like working a lot with nature, and I absolutely cannot wait for spring to come back around because I have so many ideas. But in early spring, or rather late spring, early summer, I purchased a couple different decks that really helped me with that. So I'm going to talk about the Faceted Garden first. I needed this deck to come into my life at the time that it did, and that's one of the main reasons that I'm incredibly thankful for it. So I had made a video proclaiming that I didn't like oracle decks, and then I was like, you know what, maybe I'm just being really unfair to them and I haven't figured out what I like yet. And so my tarot practice like dramatically shifted when I purchased this deck, and I realized that, sorry, that was my dog sneezing. When I realized that I prefer oracle decks that have like titles instead of keywords. There's more to my imagination when I receive the word pillar. I think my problem with oracle decks with like specific keywords is that I feel like I'm being like told what the message is. And I know that's kind of contrary to what I just said about William Blake and like enjoying the words, but the difference is William Blake's has like an entire verse for you to interpret. Most oracle decks have like just one keyword. And so if I receive like the word focus, it's like, okay, well, you know, and sometimes I like that. Like when I'm really busy, I like being told like exactly what I need. But I think most of the time I prefer everything to be a little bit more open-ended, because I do journal when I tarot read. And so I like to sit down and think about like, what does the term watershed to me mean to me? And actually it's crazy that this card popped up with this one, because watershed is deeply important to me. I spend a lot of time thinking about the watershed here living in South Louisiana. And so I have my own personal interpretation of what the watershed means. And I prefer when decks give me that space to let that interpretation through. But I'm grateful for this deck because there was a period of time in early summer, late spring, where I was going outside almost every single day, and I was communicating with the plants in front of me and asking myself, what can I learn from the bees? What can I learn from these beautiful trees around me? What can I learn from the scarlet sages and the passion vine and the gold fritillaries that are fluttering around? And I did find that because these words are so, to me at least, expansive, and they don't lock me down, I get to be tied to the overall spiritual component of nature overall. Right? Like when we receive like a keyword like focus, it's like so limited in its scope to me. And once again, I think that's just kind of a personal thing for me, that it doesn't kind of tap me into the whole realm of like nature as my spirituality overall. But a word like spade, like, yeah, that's a tool, so it's a little bit more tangible, but you think about like all of the different ways that we as humans use tools, but what are the tools that creatures use? You know, what are the quote-unquote tools that plants use in order to reproduce year from year? And so it's just a little bit more broad for me and allows me to deeply reflect on those larger themes of spirituality. So I needed this deck when it came in. It did teach me, no, hey, you do like oracle decks. you like oracle decks that are expansive to you. So this was the Faceted Garden deck I'm very grateful for this year. That will also make it probably within my top 10 best buys of the year. I'm not even going to say probably, it's definitely. Following up with that is going to be another deck that I used within that practice, and it's going to be my Mystic Fairies Tarot, and I did edge this one. in orange because that's my favorite color. Why? Here we go. My husband bought me this one for my birthday in July. And this is another deck that I took out into the garden with me with the Faceted garden and did quite a bit of reading. I have a little gnome garden in the side of my yard, and so I just really enjoy looking at things from a microscopic level when I'm playing around with like the gnome ornaments, and they're tiny. They're probably like 3 inches tall. It really helps me to use this deck with the tiny little fairies and kind of imagine a world that hides underneath the leaves and hides underneath the flowers that maybe perhaps I'm not tuned into because, you know, I am a human and I'm not tiny and I'm not able to climb underneath the leaves. It just reminds me that there's life on a microscopic level that I deeply appreciate and I'm happy is part of like the overall ecosystem. And the colors of this bring me such joy. I still can't decide if it feels like a spring deck to me or a summer deck or a fall deck. It definitely reminds me of like early fall when the leaves are like slowly changing colors. But then we get like a lot of like berries here, which also remind me a lot of the fall and also at the same time the spring. So it's almost as if this deck exists within its own timeline, and I think that's another reason that I'm grateful for it too, because I think that this is a deck that I'm going to be able to use all year round. And because it has a little bit more of like a fantasy theme, I wouldn't be opposed to using this deck to pull cards for my garden even in winter, because I do find that some of the imagery is a little bit more like pared back. Like, yeah, I know that this has stuff all over the card, like visually, like it's a little bit more like cluttered than rather simple, but like a lot of the stuff that we see is like repeating images, like with these flowers. And so I don't know, there's not like a whole lot to focus on, because if they do use an element, it tends to like fill up the entire background. And so in that way, it does remind me a little bit of winter, because as opposed to like Slavic legends, which I'll get to in a couple minutes, there's not as much like clutter that's cluttering up my eyes. So I think it can be used in all seasons. So this is another deck that I'm grateful for. So naturally, I'm gonna have to show Slavic Legends next because I just referred to it as cluttered, and that breaks my heart because I didn't mean to refer to it that way. I guess what I mean is like more detailed. I feel like this is a deck, the contrast is like on full absolute blast. This one gets shown all the time on my channel. I think it is my most useful deck in my collection for client readers. So at the end of the summer, I was given the opportunity to really put myself out there, and I had already been kind of stretching my limits of how public I wanted to be by creating a YouTube channel, but I decided that it was part of my larger healing journey to begin offering client readings in person. And so I signed up for a couple of events hosted by a local metaphysical shop. I'll leave a link in the description box below to them because I really do admire the work they do and my community. And I all of a sudden had to decide, well, what decks are going to come with me? And of course I had to pick Slavic Legends because this is a deck that, with its rich, intense imagery, I love it so much. It reminds me to be very present. It reminds me to slow down and look at the details. And I mean, it is just visually stunning. I will say hands down, this is the most beautiful tarot deck that I own. And when I pull it out for clients, like, you can see on their faces how much they love this one. Because it is a standard RWS, I'm able to really communicate messages to, I say it's like a standard RWS. It's like close. It's not like a clone, but like it definitely is a heavy RWS. I'm able to communicate messages to clients in a way that I think they really appreciate, because I can kind of point out some of like the more traditional imagery that is on the card, so they understand that I am getting my message from somewhere. Like the images and the symbols and the meanings I'm assigning them kind of make sense. But it also has a lot of plants in there too. So when I see these ferns, I automatically think about the way that ferns in my yard kind of curl into each other. And so of course I can bring that association in with the hermit, being that the hermit is retreating within, and you know, it'll come out and it'll unfurl when it deems necessary, but a lot of times those ferns really are tightly like those fronds are tightly wound, and so it's just loaded with botanicals. So I think that's one of it makes it a very good reader for me. But I'm grateful for this deck because this is the deck that I think taught me that I could read for other people and the messages would really resonate. I've had more experiences with this deck reading for clients that are positive than any other deck. I mean, I've used other decks with clients, but like it's this one that I keep coming back to again and again and again and again and again. So I don't really use this one for myself much. It's slotted itself into this is what I use for clients, and I'm 1000% okay with that. I don't feel like I'm being robbed of anything because like I said, every time I read for clients, this is the deck that I pick. Unless like there's like a specific theme, like Zombie Oracle. But it works for me. So I'm just very grateful to it, and also to my growth overall this year, that I allowed myself to put myself out there and read for others. So Slavic Legends, another one I showed you almost all of the cards for because we just love it. Next I've got Little Birds, which has gorgeous linen cardstock, but let me get it on camera. It's a little slippery. So when I first sat down to read with this deck, I asked a question in relation to myself, and I got the King of Cups. And in this deck, the King of Cups is a Louisiana blue heron, and I'm from Louisiana. And so I really felt like this deck completely saw me for me. King of Cups is my signifier. And so when this card pulled up, it was like, oh, okay, you know who I am. And I'm getting a little bit teary-eyed and a little bit emotional with it because I think that this is the deck, other than the first one that I ever purchased, which is Terra Botanical, I think that this is the deck that makes me feel the most seen. And so I'm grateful for that comfort that it provides to me. The answers are always incredibly accurate. And I think that this is like a delightful little magical tool that, you know, you don't really, most people don't give much stock to the little birds. And then when you sit down and read with them, you realize that the little birds are very accurate. Because they're birds, they see everything from a bird's eye point of view. And so I think that they're able to give you advice that is really very expansive. And every time I read with this deck, I feel like I see a bunch of different threads connected that I had never seen connected before. I'm very thankful for that because I know that if I ever need a deck that gives me a broader point of view, this is the one that I go to. I know if I need a deck that sees me for me, this is the deck that I go to. But I'm also really grateful for this deck because the first time that I ever hung out with my best friend, I sat down and I pulled some cards from this deck, and it really illustrated to me that it was going to be a really beautiful like partnership, and that we would be able to, because I work with her, or rather she's a teacher too, that we would be able to provide a lot of like resources to each other and ideas to each other. And so far that's been really, really true. So there's a bit of a nostalgia factor in there as well with me, is that every time I sit down to read, I think of her because of how accurately this deck presented our friendship. But around this time, I'm stopping at this card for just a second to talk about it. Around the time that I had purchased this deck, I also was kind of going through what I consider to be to be my death period. I was really going through some massive changes in like September and August of this year, where I was trying to figure out exactly who I was. And I pulled the death card, and then I also pulled this, and I thought it was beautiful because it was a great, gorgeous depiction. This card was what made me realize that I was going through a death period, because it's a little swamp bird. I don't remember his name, but I know his name has the word swamp in it, so hello, nod to Louisiana. But he's like edging over here looking at what's to come. And I really thought that that was quite beautiful, because even though he's looking for more and he's trying to expand his point of view, there's still this beautiful little elephant ear, I guess. It looks like an elephant ear to me below him that can like catch his fall if he like falls. And I like that. I think it represented me overall, is that I was looking for more, I was yearning for more, I was searching for more, but I also had that support system underneath me that would have caught me if I fell. This sat on my altar for at least 2 months. So this deck has just been incredibly thankful to me, like grateful. I'm sorry, and it's been thankful to me. I don't know why I said that. It's been incredibly important to me, and I'm incredibly thankful for it. There we go. Shanna D still has like a few copies left, but she did post that she doesn't know if she's gonna do like a reprint. So if you need the nudge to go buy it, go buy it. And Shanna's like an awesome person, so go support her. Go support her, because like my experience with this deck is wholeheartedly one of the best out of all the things that I purchased in 2024. It's one of those decks that's like a catalyst, I think. It's willing to point out for you where you need to grow. All right, next I have another delicious cardstock deck, my Aztec Tarot. If you're on my channel, I know you've seen this one. I don't think I can make a list without including the Aztec Tarot, to be honest. I really just don't think it's possible. So the Aztec Tarot, why am I grateful for this one this year? Well, when school started and I was going through a aforementioned death period, and everything about me was shifting and changing, and I felt like I was taking on a whole new identity, one that was more authentic to me. I needed a deck that was a very clear, concise, no bullshit deck to help me through that. And so, of course, I had to turn to the Aztec Tarot. This is one that I feel like on my busiest days, on my darkest days, cuts right through the bullshit and gives me the answer that I need. And so I believe that I placed this like number 4 on my favorite decks list, my top 10 tarot decks. I made that video in July, and I think that this deck would be even higher on that list. Like I would probably place this like number 3. It is so important to me. I cannot express in words how important this deck is to me, because every time I'm feeling overwhelmed, this is the deck that I turn to. It doesn't hurt too that the cardstock is just like really accessible. I have very small hands, so it's extremely difficult for me to riffle shuffle. So this deck, and then also Little Birds, though I didn't mention it, the gorgeous like linen cardstock just makes like the cards like so bendy, and it's one of those decks you go to when you're tired and you're exhausted and you need that kind of reading that just gives you the answer. But like also like there's such lushness to like the experience of like holding this deck. Like it's just beautiful. Like I love everything about it. I love how it sounds. It's just gorgeous. So as you can tell from the Jade Oracle and the Aztec Oracle, the Aztec Tarot, I do really like decks that embrace the sun's energy. So when school was back in session and I finally got enough time to really kind of slow down and think about some of the things that I was creating, I wanted a deck to help me continue to tap into that creativity cycle. As you can tell, like 2024 was a big year of me trying to embrace that creative side of me. And so I purchased Wild Radiance. This is another one of my best purchases in 2024. I know for a fact this will be in that video. And I am so thankful for this deck. This deck, every time I would sit down to read about some sort of creative problem I was having, because the imagery is just really off center is what I'm gonna say. Like, yes, this is the Ten of Wands, but it's definitely not someone that's like carrying like a stick. It's someone that's carrying like the whole world. So it kind of gives that impression of like Atlas with the whole world on his shoulders. So I can see the link, but like I have to do a little bit of kind of like mental legwork to get to that link. And I love this deck for that. I feel like it's almost kind of like a warm up to my brain, that before I'm sitting down to write a lesson plan or plan a YouTube video, I can pull a couple cards from this deck, and it's like, it gets like, it's gonna sound so cringe for me to say this, but it's like it gets like the juice flowing. I love the bright colors of this. I've been pulling this deck out a lot this week, along with Aztec Tarot and the Jade Oracle. And I know that's a little bit strange, being that like we're near the end of November and I'm pulling out decks that are very clearly coded for the summertime. But in my defense, like it just hit like 40 degrees like yesterday for I think like the second time this year. So it's still pretty warm in Louisiana. Like I think the high today is like 72. But when I'm really experiencing some seasonal affective depressive disorder, I need to turn to a deck that is just a bright burst of sunlight. So this is definitely considered one of my good mood decks. I would say this is my #1 good mood deck. It makes me feel powerful. It makes me feel bright. It makes me feel like the sun is just shining through my chest. This is a deck that's like very chest heavy, because like it's almost as if you are like standing up and you're putting your chest forward and kind of like jutting it out, like, here world, like see me as who I am. I've written some poetry with this deck. That didn't go as like well as I anticipated. I think because I like decks that are a little bit more detailed for poetry work, but I still produce like a couple poems that I'm still really proud of. So I'm willing to give it like another shot, but like perhaps like pair it with another deck to see how that comes out. But I think that just goes to show you like the depth of how universal this deck is. Like I think I've just listed like 10 things that I use this deck for. So she's a favorite of mine, and it doesn't even really bother me that it's very like body beautiful at all, because I get so much value out of the meanings that I see that I don't even really pay attention to the fact that all of the people are really body beautiful. So for example, the Strength card has always been a card that I have struggled with. I don't like the Strength card. Like I think it might be my least favorite major arcana, but that being said, I pulled this the other day and I thought about how like it looked like she had a lot of core strength to be able to maneuver her body in such a way. And then I had also pulled the Fool with this, and so it made me think about core values. Like, what are the core values that you're willing to leap off a cliff for? And so now all of a sudden the Strength card is associated with core values to me. And it makes sense, because your core values give you strength to do whatever you have to do, even in the face of like difficult circumstances, but also you know, what you power through with strength kind of builds your core values upon reflecting on those terrible experiences. And so I don't know, this is a deck that teaches me. And so, oh look, I guess the Fool's right here. I must have not shuffled it in. I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for it. Like this is almost everything that I could want in a tarot deck. So definitely one of my best buys of 2025. Or 2024. I keep saying 2025 in my head too. I want to read for other people with this deck. I think that's going to be my goal for 2025. And then like this Two of Pentacles, like what's going on here? I don't know, man, but I'm learning from it. All right, next. So I think that this was probably like September, maybe like October-ish. I was really having a hard time settling into a new friendship that I had made. So I've historically expressed like avoidant attachment styles. And so it's just difficult for me to like form intense, deep relationships and like sustain them. I'm a very avoidant person when it comes to friendship, but I've been trying to break those cycles, which of course all started with the Zombie Tarot at the beginning of this video that I shared. And so at the time where I was really running up against some issues, I happened to purchase the Mystic Grove Oracle. And I'm so glad that I did. I did edge this deck. I don't quite know how I feel about the fact I edged it, but it's okay. It doesn't look bad. So I think I was still hanging on to the end of summer and still grieving the end of summer when I purchased this deck, because it feels like late summer when everything is really full blast, and it's like, you know, in the next week or two it's about to die off. And so I purchased it because it cyclically matched what was going on. But I pulled this card, and I remember it telling me something along the lines of, you need to trust the person that is offering you friendship, just like this tiger is trusting the strawberry that this girl is offering it. And it was one of the most powerful experiences of reading tarot in my entire life. And it kept going like that. I pulled an oracle card from this deck for about 3 weeks before school. And every single time I pulled from it, I could instantly see the connection between the guidebook and what was happening in my life. So this is definitely another one of the decks that made me believe, quote unquote. I love it. I love it. I love it. This is one of my top oracle decks ever. She also reads really well for other people, so I found a lot of use in that. So like, she reads for me, she reads for other people. I love the fact that we have so many butterflies in all of the cards, because I can bring in my own knowledge of nature when working with this deck. So yeah, I'm really grateful for this deck this year. In a lot of ways, she gave me the push that I needed to open my heart and let people in. So I will say, not only am I grateful for this deck, but I think that this deck, probably more so than any of the other ones that I listed, except for probably, I would say, Little Bird, changed my life this year. So Secrets of the Mystic Grove, and look, yeah, I edged it. Like I said, don't know if I love the edging, but it's already done. Can't undo it. All right, next, and then after this we have 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 left, so we're getting close to the end. This is my Inner Child Tarot. Let me make sure I'm on the screen because these cards are huge. There we go. Wow, oh wow. So see earlier conversations about having to work through some shit in my life. So when I was butting up against some of those cycles, I had seen this deck on someone's channel and I was like, I need this deck right now. And so I purchased it, and I didn't use this deck a whole lot this year. I probably only used it intensively for about 2 weeks, but this was one of the cards that I pulled. And I oftentimes think of the Chariot as being someone who is like setting out on a journey for the first time in their life with no support. So in the other cards, the Fool always has someone as a mentor, but the Chariot is the card where the Fool is the one in the steering wheel. And it really reminded me that it was time for me to take control of my own life and my own choices and to live for me. And so I think that all of the messages that I received from this deck were really perfectly timed. I did a garden tarot reading with my best friend where we worked through some of her kind of like inner wounded child things. And so I believe in the power of this deck. I think that you do have to sit down with a guidebook because a lot of the cards do reference fairy tales and like popular children's stories. To get the full effect of this deck, you have to like sit down with that guidebook and take it really, really slow. But I think that every time I've sat down with this deck and the guidebook, the experience has been totally worth it. So I'm grateful for what it's done for me this year, but this is another kind of general gratitude of I'm happy to have this deck because now I know, hey, if I need to nurture that inner child, if I need to reparent the little Katie who's inside of me, this is going to be the deck that I go to. And I'm a fan of the colors, y'all. I really love like a bright blast of colors. And so, I don't know. I'm getting a tattoo next week, and I hope that it is just as saturated with colors as this deck is. She's so beautiful. Look, she's filling her own cup from this waterfall that's coming down. Beautiful, beautiful. So that is the Inner Child Tarot deck. I think it's like Inner Child Cards is what it's called. Okay, and I think that the next one I'm going to share is the last one that I can pinpoint like a specific memory for. The next four are just like general gratitude decks. So I want to share Greenwitch. This definitely made it onto my top 10 favorite decks of the year video. Oh, we have a cat. All right, we've retrieved the cat. Normally she's not the one that climbs up here. That was kind of crazy. Usually it's her brother. So I always love this deck. I always love this deck. I'm always grateful for this deck. I'm always thankful for this deck. I think that this deck is like coming home and putting on a really comfortable pair of like sweatpants at the end of the day. You know, it's like, I don't know, it's like taking your bra off. Like, it is the most comfortable experience of all time. Perhaps that was like a little sacrilegious to compare that to a tarot deck, but whatever, it is what it is. So I recently had a reading with this deck that reminded me to redefine my purpose. And I think that's what this deck is really well suited for, because the imagery is really clean and concise. And I do consider this to be a really good just general reader to get a quick message. And so I've recently started pulling from this deck to have cards to place on my altar, because I think the meaning is so clear that it gives you something to work from. But when I did a reading most recently, let me find the cards, I pulled these two, and I'm going to get vulnerable here, but of course I always do. There was a year in time where I was living in Alabama and not in Louisiana, and I felt really lonely. I had a lot of, I don't want to say I was wealthy, but I had a lot more money than I usually had because my husband was working like 80-hour weeks. Our rent was paid for through his job, but I didn't have any visible support system. So I consider that to be my Nine of Pentacles time. And when I receive the Nine of Pentacles, my life is really usually feeling very lonely. I might have all of the extraneous things, but I have no support system. So quite recently, I asked the Greenwitch Tarot, what are the two things that I need to work on closing out this year? And I pulled this Nine of Pentacles and the Witch, which is the Magician. And I felt like for this card, that was incredibly significant for me, because at the end of the day, this is the only Nine of Pentacles that I think I've ever seen that has more than one person. So it's like, Katie, you can have the wealth, but you can also sit back and enjoy the social circle that's around you. And that felt really good, right? Because typically this is a card you would see with like the Ten of Pentacles, but in this deck, like the Ten of Pentacles has like an older person and a family and like this beautiful lush garden. So it definitely depicts like more of the wealth and the lineage side of things. This depicts like the day-to-day, hey, I have it all, but I also have people too. And so this has been on my altar, helping me to redefine my relationship with the Nine of Pentacles, which to me is like the most heartbreaking card in the deck. And then I also pulled the Magician too from this. And I've been struggling a lot with work recently because we've switched to a new teacher evaluation system, and it's been very difficult for teachers to meet the new standards that they're requiring. You can meet the standards every week, but that when they come in and they evaluate, they only look at you for like one day. And so you might not meet everything that they're looking for in that day, though you would meet it over the course of the week. And this card really defined for me in particular that I need to come back to my own power. So start looking at as my teaching not under the lens of like the system that is arbitrary, but what can I do to feel tapped into the power and what I consider to be the sacred work that I do day to day, and not listen to the bullshit of the system, right? It's the Magician, but it's not the Magician, it's the Witch. You know, what can you do to take back your power separate from the system that is trying to rob you of autonomy? And so these have been my altar cards. We've been working on some things, but I think it goes without saying that the Greenwitch is always a treasure deck in my collection. You know, the jewel tones are exactly what I want, but it meets me where I need it to meet me. It's a very cozy deck. Okay, and so the last four are decks that I've just used a lot this year that I'm generally grateful for, but I don't really consider them tied to like a specific moment, though as I go through it, I might find that I do. So this is not an aesthetic match per se, but damn, is it a functional match. And that's going to be my Prophet Oracle with my Femme Erotiques. Now, YouTube, I'm not showing porn, I swear, I'm showing a tarot deck. I'm showing a tarot deck, YouTube. But I do want to give like a little bit of a content warning. I mean, I guess I should have said it before, like the boobs came out, but the deck on the right is definitely not safe for work. So if you have children around, maybe like fast forward. So I use these two decks when I am starting my menstrual cycle. And so I pull one card from each deck, and it's just my overall theme for the month. And I found it to be incredibly accurate, but also incredibly healing, because a lot of the cards in the Prophet Oracle feature people that are also naked, similar to the Femme Erotiques. Like, this is a great match because actually they're kind of in similar positions. It reminds me to come back to my body, right? And like every woman knows, if they have a period that is a little bit rough, that sometimes it's hard to find that appreciation for our body. I'm like loving how these are matching up here. And so for me, I find it to be a very healing and validating practice to have a pair of decks that reminds me to essentially come home to myself and to see the start of my period as the beginning of a purging. And it's kind of like a divine purging. Like, what am I purging out of my body this month? And you can almost see it as if like you're not only purging, of course, like your menstrual blood, but you're also purging the experiences that you've had. You're purging the feelings that you've had. That was my female cat. She might be agreeing with me. I don't know. I think she just wants to leave the room. Let me go grab that. But I think we need to have a practice that reminds us to come back home to our body and see it and appreciate it and relish in it. And this pair of decks definitely provides that for me. Look at this. I mean, maybe like the colors aren't an aesthetic match, but the content is totally on par. Sing and dance and be joyous. And then it has the Two of Wands here for alliance. Oh, life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. And then we have the Seven of Cups here. So it's almost like a message to not look backwards, but predict and brainstorm what could happen in the future. Give not of wisdom, but of faith and lovingness. And then we have the Nine of Swords here. So this is what we need to give to people in that position. Only when you are empty are you at a standstill and balanced. And death, you are mortal. This almost looks like like Jesus on the cross. So I definitely see the motif here of like a sacrificial giving up everything so you can be at a standstill and balanced. The earth delights to feel your bare feet, and the winds long to play with your hair. The moon, a turning in the journey. Ah, so fucking beautiful. I love it. Once again, YouTube, this was not porn. It was a tarot deck. Just in case you were wondering, YouTube. And I'm not saying YouTube like my audience. I'm saying YouTube like the actual corporation. Because I've tried to post a flip through of that. YouTube did not like that deck. But if you have any questions or any cards you want to see, just let me know and I can provide them for you. All right, and my last two, and I'm going to go ahead and say shout out to Racine for giving me the confidence to repeat my favorite deck on my channel all the time. Y'all know what it is if you've been here a while. It's going to be Terra Botanical. I don't blame you if you click off at this point because I showed this deck in every video, but you know what? I'm clearly grateful for it, so it's got to be here. And also Story Through Stones. If I could only have two decks in my collection, these would be the two decks that I pick. These are the decks that I work with for ritual work. So especially at particular like turnings of the wheel, I will pull out Terra Botanical, but also special moments such as my birthday or the new year, or even when I have like a new achievement, like I bought like this house. I remember doing like a very specific reading for this house with this deck. Of course, that doesn't happen all the time, but it's still very ritual-esque, ceremony-esque in the sense that I use it to mark those important events. I use it at the end of the year for graduation because I am a teacher of seniors. So when the kids graduate, this is the deck that I turn to kind of send them off and reflect on what I learned from that group. But I'm thankful for this pairing all the time. Story of Three Stones I use a lot in my ancestor work. I feel like my grandfather, on my mom's side in particular, comes through a lot in this deck. But if you want to talk about decks that make you feel witchy, that make you feel powerful, that make you feel keyed into everything, it's these. And this is another reminder, because I do, like I said, consider King of Cups to be my signifier, that I should get a cypress tree in my egret tattoo to represent my home. But yep, I used this deck recently when I read about starting therapy and what therapy was going to do for me. And I pulled the World from this deck, telling me that therapy was going to help me close out cycles. And I think that YouTube is a larger part of that, right? Because being here and being able to express my story through the love of like decks, but also through sharing how my tarot practice like grows and shifts and evolves, right? I think a really well in tune like tarot practice, or even a magical practice in general, reflects and shifts and changes depending on what you need, depending on what you feel you need to tune into to become a more powerful and more secure, confident, authentic version of yourself. And I think that these decks always help me within that practice, but also like just exhibiting and existing in this space. So I have to end my video on these being the two decks that I'm most grateful for, because I think that being that Terra, this was my first tarot deck ever, I'm grateful for the fact that I am a tarot reader, right? Like I started reading in January of, what was it? January of 22. It was like January 6th of 2022. And I can say that like I have dramatically shifted and changed because of my tarot practice. So I'm thankful for that, and I'm grateful for that. All right, so I think that's enough decks for the day. I showed quite a bit in this video. I don't even know how long it is. Let's see. Oh, we're at 54 minutes. I'm not usually one for long videos, but look, here we go. I had a lot of things to say. So I think that I said everything I needed to say while I was showing off Terab Botanical, but I want to go ahead and give a thank you to all of you who are here. I really appreciate sharing this space with you, and I hope that if you celebrate the holidays at this time of year, you have a really beautiful, magical time, and you're enjoying taking part of the rest and relaxation that I think the darker half of the year allows us. So I'll see you guys next time. Thank y'all so much for watching.